There's something magical about things that just work right out of the box, and this method just works. You implement this and you will double your value as an editor instantly. We're gonna go through each of these stages in depth and walk through each one in an actual project, but here they are up front. 0-sync. This is for syncing and organizing footage on the timeline before any cuts are made. 1-selects. This is for making selects, but without any real additional destructive editing. We're not deleting anything out of the sequences here. 2-stringouts. This is for creating separate sequences which help organize the selects. Think of each sequence as its own themed bin. Stringouts can be anything, really. They can be B-roll, you can have a B-roll string out, you can have interview footage string outs on a specific topic. But yeah, think of these as these are all separate sequences which help you organize further, as if you were dropping those specific clips into a bin, but instead they're just going to be on different sequences or timelines. 3-assembly. This is what I call the audio cut. This is creating an edit for structure and content. The main note here is that, if it doesn't make sense or sound correct, just by listening to it, it probably needs some restructuring. So that's why this is a really important stage. But think of this as being able to, creating a structure for your edit, which you could watch down without any visuals. That's what the assembly is for, really. 4 is first review. This is where we're editing for pace and adding visuals. 5-collab. This is for anything that is in the review process. This can be internally or externally, but it begins the moment any other stakeholder other than the editor reviews the first review cut and has feedback. The goal of this stage is to get to an approved cut, which we can then reformat into various deliverables. And then 6-delivery or QC and delivery. We get here only after the edit has been approved. Quality checking happens in the editing software as well as after we export. This is also where we're going to break out the different deliverables in this stage. 0-sync. What are the key takeaways? The goal of this stage is, yes, to sync our footage, but it's also just as important that when we're syncing footage, we use this stage to make sure we have clearly defined and independently editable tracks of audio. What does this mean? It means that we have an individual track for each audio channel we work with. Sometimes this means separating audio that is baked into a camera, and sometimes this is breaking out audio that was recorded separately. This also helps us avoid ever having to use the audio mixer in the edit. Honestly, I get how people want to use the audio mixer and they want to tweak stuff. Realistically, 95 to 99% of the jobs, you'll never need to touch the audio mixer. You can do all of your mixing on the timeline itself. It's cumbersome and not everyone knows how to use it, which is important when working on something you might need to pass off to another editor. Beyond that, it's just simpler and faster and will enable you to make revisions when they come in from other stakeholders a lot faster and a lot more efficiently and effectively. For footage with timecode jam cameras, it's okay to sync footage using multicam sequences, but I want to be really clear. We never edit out of multicam sequences. We always go into those sequences and drop the synced footage and audio into the sequence so we can edit out of the timeline. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you are editing out of a multicam sequence, I 100% guarantee that you are not working with me on that project. You are working with somebody else. You can't visually see the tracks on the timeline. That is bad. You need to be able to look at the timeline and know visually how it's pieced together. And that's the primary reason we don't use multicam sequences. The other reason, honestly, is because not everybody knows how to do it. And so it's not that effective when you're working collaboratively again. Another note is you can have many versions of a synced sequence. Why might you want multiple sync sequences? To organize or group footage on the timeline, separating interview with verite, with B-roll, or maybe organize the synced footage chronologically. It just basically gives you more flexibility to kind of break the initial sequence up and work from there. You might want to start cleaning up the footage or deleting audio tracks that you don't need. And each time I do that, each time I'm doing some sort of destructive edit, I'm generally making a new sequence, especially in the earlier stages. So let's just say you sunk up 4 different, pieces of footage and recorded shoot audio, and let's just say you have 30 tracks of audio, but some of them are duplicates, and you also just have 4 clean tracks of audio, and that's all you want to work with, moving forward. You can just delete the other, 26 tracks of audio and just keep the 4 that you need, right? To not have to carry all that stuff into any future sequences. You also might just want to clean it up. You might want to trim the heads and tails of things, you know, if you really don't need that. I call this the mise en place stage of the edit, which is getting everything prepared. You're prepping everything before you start to cook, right? But also because setting the foundation for your footage will save you lots of time down the line. That said, as soon as you start making cuts and as soon as you start making selects, it's time to shift into the select stage of the edit. All right, so now let's dive into the edit to see all this in practice. So yeah, I just want to call out that before we jump in, you know, everything that we go over is not going to be fully applicable into every single project that you do or work on. But it's good to sort of take the time and sort of pre-troubleshoot some things. So I'm going to go a little bit in depth here and spend a little bit more time in each different stage of the process just to kind of make that clear. But you know, not everything is going to apply to every single project that you work on. I just want to kind of be upfront with that. The one sort of glaring note I will make is that you do want to spend additional time, again, at the front end of the project, setting things up and making it sort of as best prepped as possible before you dive into anything, because that's always going to save you more time on the back end. So just want to be as clear about that as possible. All right, now that we got our first sequence set up, let's jump into the sync. So what I like to do is actually just take all the footage that we have and drop it right onto the sync timeline. You know, we're going to find out quickly. This is really helpful at a glance. Like, let us just visually see what we're working with here. So we have this primary interview footage, and just by looking at it, you know, we can scrub the timeline. And once we get down here, it looks like we have our second camera here for that. So we know, just like organizing the timeline a little bit, we know that we have these kind of two cameras that we're going to want to sync up. Let me back up actually a little bit. So the reason I like to get everything into the timeline and just to see what we're working with is because even though we have sort of like a broad understanding of like what the shoot was, it's really helpful just we're going to have to review all this footage anyways, so it's good to just be able to get a real sense visually for like what we're working with here, right? And so immediately, just like a few things that are jumping out to me on the timeline, we can see that some of these don't have audio, right? So we know right off the bat these are slow motion B-roll sequences. Like, these are not things that we're going to sync up with anything, right? So we can immediately disregard that we're going to add audio to these, because again, they're slow motion B-roll clips. They're not meant to have audio that we're going to need to sync up. And then looking down here, looks like we have matching kind of B-roll shots. So it looks like they have this sort of sequences where they're filming sort of these Cinnabons getting made, and we have a slow motion cam, which is the A cam, and then we have this B cam, which looks like it's shot kind of like tighter in, more textural shots, close-ups of the action being had, and simultaneously we do have audio that is attached to that. So this was not shot off speed, it was just shot normal. So again, just like glancing at it, what I like to do in the sync stage is just kind of like organize on the timeline visually, so I get a sense of like where things are. So at the very top of this, we can have our primary interview, and then the actual brief, we're not basically breaking down this entire footage. We're looking for kind of a specific thing, just about kneading dough, as opposed to, hey, making a whole series of things. I'm sure there's many steps in the process of making Cinnabons, which is what this whole project is about, the broader project. But for our specific brief, the thing that we're looking for is kind of a specific technique or technical video that we're creating that is just about kneading dough. So we're eventually going to need to find that, but for our purposes right now, just in the sync stage, I really just like to break it down and organize the timeline so that I have a sense of like where things live. Okay, so we'll put our interview at the top here, and then what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go through and find all the things that are B-roll. I'm going to put them at the end of the timeline. So let me just do that now, and honestly, I'll just like copy and paste them here. It can be pretty sloppy, but I just want sort of clear gaps where there is no audio, just so I know what's off speed and what's not. This is,
I can measure it in there.
Yep, that's like a normal clip. So we're going to take all this, we're just going to dump it over here.
delicious.
We can organize this better later, but for right now, we're just grabbing all the stuff that doesn't have any audio and we're putting it at the end because we're really focused on things that we need to sync up with like the clean audio that was recorded separately. This stuff was definitely, you know, just by nature of something like something that's cooking, it was definitely shot in a linear fashion, right? Like you're not going to, you need to do, it's procedural, so you need to do certain things first when you're cooking. So we just know to kind of keep them in a bit of a chronological order in the timeline. So sort of like the earliest stuff goes still at the top, earlier in the timeline, and then stuff that's coming later, like clearly they have the, you know, the kneaded dough over here. And the same thing here, we have this footage where she's kind of in tighter. So for our purposes here, it also looks like we have this stuff where she's kind of talking on camera. That is going to be important to, you know, sync up because anytime we have her on camera talking, it's potential that we're going to use that in our actual cut. So anyways, now we have our timeline basically broken up where it's like sit down interview here, on camera stuff here, B-roll with sort of audio here, and then B-roll that was the wider shot with no audio here. Okay, so we're going to save that. And now it's like we have all this. This is a fine sequence that we can always go back to and look at and just, you know, if we need to pull something from. But this is where sort of like versioning starts. So what I'll do is I'll duplicate this and I'll create a new version of this. You know, it gives you basically license to start cutting and moving stuff around and sort of messing with a clean sequence. Because you know you can always jump back into a previous version and find exactly what it was. So like right here, we have 2 tracks of audio that like there's no audio there, so we don't even need that. So I'm going to unlink this audio and I'm just going to delete it. So now we know that all of this stuff is just B-roll. And then we also have this, which has 2 tracks of audio, but it's actually one of them doesn't even have audio in it, right? It's just an empty track. I'm gonna get rid of that. I also don't like to keep. I like to keep my timeline kind of not expanded out like this. I like to keep it pretty tight. That's just general because once you start using multiple layers of things, you know, you quickly get a very full and packed timeline. So now we're looking here and same thing, like we have a whole track of audio that we don't need, and now we have this here, same thing. You know, we don't need that. And just looking at this footage, we can see that we have an audio slate. That's going to help us a lot. So I'm just going to use the synchronize feature in Premiere. And honestly, what I like to do is, this is a 50-minute long interview. What I'll do is I'll just cut off the end of it and just make it a shorter clip to sync up because it just processes faster. So I'll hit Option S again. I'll go to audio and it's going to find these tracks and we're going to sync this bad boy up. All right. So now let's see.
Really
yep, we can hear it now. We have
new spot for. Is it okay to talk like in that like Nuke now because
clearly this is all sunk up footage now, and we'll move this out. Oh, I'm sorry. And now what we can do is we can, you know, extend this out again, and we have our full thing, and it just goes a lot quicker. I mean, you can do it with the full sequences, but or the full clips, but I just find that, you know, takes less processing time. So now what we want to do is we want to find the clean shoot audio and see what we're working with here. So for this, it looks like we have 4 tracks, 4 unique channels of audio, 4 channels as we can see here. But just glance at, you know, visually we can see this is actually 2 channels that are the same. Channel 1 is the same as channel 3 and channel 2 is the same as channel 4. We can see that just again visually. We can just do this the old-fashioned way. We have a slate in here, so we can just find out what this is and we can listen in and hear what this is saying.
This is Buns Take 1.
Buns Take 1. So we want to see here. Is this right?
Rebecca interview, take 1, Mark.
So we want Rebecca interview, take 1. That's what we're looking for. It looks like it's also possible that they didn't record separate audio for the actual interview itself and that they were running it directly into the cameras. This is just this is a guess. You know, this is actually good to know because it's like, you know, that's definitely information that we would have wanted before we started the edit, but it's also not necessary, and some of it is just like deducing, you know, where things are, or it's saying, hey, we don't have this, and just double checking with the client, like, did you record separate audio for the interview or did you run that directly into camera? These are like little things that you're gonna stumble across, because it's possible that, hey, maybe this was in like a different folder and it just like never made it into the final folder. But you know, it's possible that they just had like a boom mic, you know, and you know, sometimes you can even see it. Sometimes, you know, you can see stuff get sort of reframed, like right here, right? Like what's going on right here? We can see that there's headphones on the table. You know, this is like little investigations that happen. We can see headphones are on the table and there's somebody doing something over here. So my guess is that they had a boom mic going and that this is the audio tech or the camera operator, whoever was doing it, and they're fixing the boom mic right here, right? You can see this arm, like there's something up here that we can't see that's out of frame, and there's headphones on here. So my guess is it was whoever was listening to the audio was going in and fixing a boom mic, and power of deduction, that boom mic was probably running straight into the camera, and that's what the audio that we have is.
Like
so let's just watch.
The Negroni.
There you go. You can hear the mic being messed with. I'm gonna guess. You know, I can't see a lav on her or anything. Again, these are all just like we're just trying to figure out if there's anything to sync up for this full interview, and I'm gonna guess that there isn't. You know, because there's no 50-minute long or you know, all of the longer sort of clips in here. None of them are the interview footage. So my guess is they just did this sit-down interview. They had a boom mic going, and they, you know, they fed it directly into camera. So let's just see.
We can all cook together. So I really want people to have access to a
I'm just
place
going in
where
between
they
these
can
two
make
different
their
audio
own
tracks and seeing if there's
home.
anything
We
different.
also host cooking.
Also, this is a good time during the sync phase to just kind of like get a basic set of levels going. So here's just like an interesting visual, right? Like if we look at these two waveforms, they definitely look identical, but you can actually see that they're not really identical. So here's our A cam audio and here's our B cam audio. And this is really subtle, but I'm just looking at it and like you can see that the peaks on the B cam go higher than the peaks on the A cam. The A cam is peaking right here, right? Right somewhere there, it's cutting it off. So this happens, you know, when basically the audio is coming in too hot and it just overcranks. Maybe you've heard it on some of my recording right now. But clearly B cam had the audio settings so that it was within a range where the audio didn't peak. So this is cleaner, right? And we can hear what this sounds like if we isolate these two audio tracks. And this is probably more info than we need for just a sync sequence, but it's a helpful little tidbit because you can visually see this in the timeline, what's happening. So I'm going to disable that track and let's listen to what it sounds like when it's not peaking.
Oh, right. So we're saying baby's belly. I like that, baby, because some people say baby's bum. Yeah, so we can say.
Okay, and now let's listen to what happens when it peaks.
Oh, right. So we're saying baby's belly.
You can actually hear the little bit of like raspiness that happens when something peaks. It's like a little vibration almost.
Oh, right. So we're saying baby's
So
belly.
that's
I like that, baby.
smooth. And then we have
Oh, right. So we're saying.
peaking. Okay, so this is again, it's helpful to know this because what we want to do at the beginning of these projects in the sync stage is to really identify like, okay, what audio are we actually going to use? What is the cleanest? Quickly, visually at a glance, like these two are not identical waveforms because we have this peaking on top. So I'm going to just go ahead and make the call. Like we don't need to use the channel or the track that was that's peaking. Like it's clearly not as good audio as the other one. So I'm just going to delete it. You know, and again, you should be fairly confident in this. This is a, you know, if they did end up shooting, you might want to go to the client and just ping them and say, hey, just making sure like you didn't record separate audio for the interview because right now we see it going straight into the camera and there's no audio for it that we're going to sync up with it, and just get confirmation there. It's always helpful because the last thing you want to do is go through an entire edit and then find out that there actually was this recording that now you have to go and piecemeal stitch it back together and find all of the audio to put back in. So it's helpful. Again, this is just a place where we're really, the sync phase is we're setting the project up so we don't have to worry about these things down the line, that we don't have to deal with any of this stuff, any issues that come down the line. So now the other thing that we can do during right here, so now we know we don't have to sync up this audio, but what we're going to do is we're going to just look and see the audio is bouncing, between -24 and -18 decibels. I like to just set some general audio levels right from the jump. And so I'll hit G on my keyboard and that brings up this audio gain, and I'll just jump it up 10 decibels. And all that does is it raises the whole level of the entire audio track up. So now if we see it, it's bouncing between, -18, -12, -6. That's kind of the area that we want dialogue in. Generally speaking, I like to keep dialogue or anytime somebody is speaking, in between -12 and -0 decibels. So it's kind of the most prominent thing.
Oven, or if it's winter, I like to put it.
Yeah, so that's okay. That's feeling good. We can also bump this audio up. Let's just bump it up 10, just so that everything across the board is bouncing, a little bit higher. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this clean shoot audio that clearly they recorded separately, and we're going to sync it up with the rest of the shoot. So this is just a matter of going through and finding the clips that have things, and we're going to go and find the slates, and thank you for slating. Now we're just going to go in here. We have Buns Take 9. We are going to go in and we're going to find Buns Take 9, and we're going to just find where the clap slate is, and we're just going to do this manually because we know, it's all slated out, so we should be good. We're just going to set our in point right at the slate, and we're going to go in here. You could do the synchronize function that's on the and sync up everything using that, but I actually find that doing it manually can actually be faster and more accurate. So we're just going to drop this in here. We're going to make sure this syncs.
Arms out.
There you go.
The best thing that I do is to test it with a little bit of sugar. So when you're
and now we have fully editable and controllable channels. And like we said, we already know that channel 1 and channel 2 are identical to channel 3 and channel 4. These are not different. And let's just see if we can tell the difference between them.
Or active dry or rapid rise. Yeah, so there's or active dry or rapid rise. Yeah.
It's not really. Generally, what happens is on shoots like this, where it's a single subject, is you'll generally have somebody with a lav mic, a little lav mic, and a boom mic or a shotgun mic, and so you can hear a clear difference between the two of these usually, and you would go in and sort of deduce, okay, which one is cleaner in what section, and use that. But inevitably, we just want to make sure that we have clean channels of audio here. For this, it doesn't sound, it's a pretty controlled environment. It doesn't sound like one is significantly better than the other, but for our purposes here, we'll just keep all 4 tracks, and I'm just going to go through and do this with the rest of the footage and just make sure it's all sunk up, and then we should be good to go. So give me a second to do that, and we'll be back when I'm done. All right, there you have it. We have everything sunk up in our sequence now. And as you can see, it's kind of, they're all spread apart, and we have sort of the original audio here. We have the 4 tracks of audio here. Some of this stuff is, just kind of doubled up. It looks a little bit sloppy. So honestly, what I'll do is I'll make another version of the sync sequence just to clean everything up. And we'll just name it correctly, so 0.3. And I also like to only keep one timeline open at a time as best I can, and so what I'll do is I'll close the other panels here, and we'll just keep this open. And so now I'm going to go through and I'm going to get rid of the original audio that we had. We have these nice clean separate audio channels now, and we are going to get rid of the 2 other tracks of audio that we don't need because they're identical. We're going to clean this up, and then what I'll do is I'll just go in and trim Like this is a little bit probably overkill, but I'll just go in and trim these so that, you know, the audio is clean and flush to the edge of the footage. So give me 2 seconds here, and let me just go through and do it. It's literally just cutting and trimming here, just to keep it nice and tidy as best we can. And I'm gonna go through. All right, give me 2 seconds. Let me just get this set. You know, it's a lot of actually like manual stuff, like doing it by hand. Not that, again, not that you can't use plugins, or not that you can't use things that do this automatically. There's definitely, you know, because it's such a repeated thing, it will save time to use programs to do it, but you always are going to have to check that program's work. And so it's kind of like deducing at the top of a project, like where your time is best spent. And if it takes 10 minutes to do this at the beginning of a project to make sure everything is nice and orderly and set up correctly, it's worth it versus having a program maybe do it for you. And I don't know, maybe it doesn't do it correctly, or maybe you're going to have to go in and do a lot of hand massaging with the stuff that, you know, to resync it, you know, just to make sure it's sunk up anyways. So sort of like deducing, again, where your time is best spent. I think for my time right now, it's going to take me 5 minutes to go in and make sure all this stuff is cleaned up and looking good. So I might as well just do it. 5 minutes is not going to make or break. If it's going to, you know, if it's going to save me hours of time, definitely I'm gonna try my best to automate this as best as possible. But sometimes, like especially when you have clap slates and when something is slated and you have audio, it's like I will almost always go in and have at least some level of manual inspection at the very beginning of a project, because I'd rather spend a full hour right at the top of a project, like getting this correct and making sure that it's clean and clear, and we have as much control of the edit as we can moving forward, and have everything, you know, looking clean and ready to go, than having to do it down the line. Because anything that is done down the line after you start editing is going to take exponentially more time than it does right at the beginning of a project. So the last thing I'm going to do in this sequence is I'm going to just kind of keep things a little bit separated, but I'm going to also gather a few things. So I just want to keep interview footage here, stand-up talking footage here, where she's doing these sort of like asides to camera. And then I want to keep all the B-roll that I've separated out into their own separate clips now. I just want to keep that clean. So I'm going to do a quick little ripple delete. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer into my resource folder in the project window. I'm going to take it, drag it into the timeline. I'm going to drag it out. And then we're just going to take these, and I'm going to hit Option up to jump these up, and basically jump these clips up through the adjustment layer so that it creates sort of cuts in them. And then I'm just going to highlight the whole adjustment layer. This is a little bit of a quick hack here, and right click and hit ripple delete. And now everything is going to it's going to close all those gaps for me, essentially, as opposed to having to go through and do it manually. Okay, so now we have everything sunk up. We have our whole project here, and we are now actually ready to edit this thing. And so we're going to actually now move it into the select stage. So I am going to get to that in the next video.
The selects phase is where we get to review all the footage. I recommend doing this right at this early stage because it will really help you get a sense of what you're working with, and the edit will start to be put together in your head. This is where some creative ideas can start to form, especially as you see repeated themes, visuals, or patterns start to emerge. This is also where I like to transcribe the full sequence in Premiere. This will come in handy later if we're going to have to revisit the sequence to find a soundbite. This is also the time, like if you know what you're looking for, like in our case, we're looking for something specific. You know, you might have multiple deliverables in a given project, but for us right now, we're looking for like a short explainer video on kneading dough, so we can look for that. Another way I make selects, which I think is helpful, is just a visual reference. If it's a good select, I jump it up 1. If it's really good, I jump it up 2. And if it's a must use, or I really love it, I jump it up 3. So it, again, it's just giving myself a nice visual reference that I can use to quickly identify things that I really thought were strong. And again, it's a good way of, instinctively knowing what sort of jumps out to you and what compels you as you're going through some of the footage. This is also where we visually leave notes for ourselves. It's a gut reaction sequence. We can essentially clip anything we want here that we like or that we think will work in the project, which is also to say it's where we start to differentiate what we definitely don't want. I should stress, this is a sequence where you can keep coming back to if there are deliverables or requests which get added to the project as you move through it. You can just duplicate the original and start the process over. Don't delete anything in this sequence. We want to preserve it in case we need to come back to it down the line. All right, so let's go ahead and review the footage and make our selects. Now it's time to jump into the select stage. So we're going to duplicate our sync sequence. We're going to drop it into this bucket, and that's all we're doing. We're basically using this this sort of method to move down the funnel of an edit, and using these distinct stages to kind of check things off so that by the end we have a product that we're happy with and that we're ready to go with. And it's just sort of a procedural way to do that. So we're gonna jump from the sync stage to selects, and we're gonna rename this to be 1.1. And now what we're doing is we're going to specifically look for parts of this that apply to the brief that we got. And the brief that we got, again, is specific to making a video about how to knead dough. It's a technical video, and it's one component of this bigger project in how to make cinnamon buns, right? So what we can do here is we can do a few things. What I normally do and what I will do here is watch down the entire interview. This is a 50-minute interview. We'll watch this down and I'll make selects based on everything. You can do it in a way where you're just specifically looking for any time that kneading dough is mentioned. And a simple way to do this is to create a transcript inside of Premiere, and creating that transcript is really going to give you the ability to search just for text. So we could do that, and we can search just for when she talks about kneading dough. But in a project like this, where there are going to be inevitably in the long term, there are going to be more deliverables outside of just the kneading dough video. You really want to take the time and watch down every bit of footage. You really want to get sort of a working knowledge of everything at your disposal, what she talks about, because even though something as simple as like a cooking video is procedural in nature, it's linear in nature, there's oftentimes throughout the course of an actual shoot, you're gonna get golden little bits that show up in some totally separate part, right? She might have some little tiny insight that might help our video way after the fact, after the question where she specifically addresses just kneading dough in the interview, right? So inevitably we do want to watch down all of the footage that's here just so we have a really good sense. And what I'll do honestly at the beginning of a project like this, where I know we're going to have multiple components, is I will go through and really try to get all of my selects in sort of one go, and then start to bucket them out into string outs. But for our purposes today, I'm just going to go and find all the bits that sort of I think we can use in our final sequence about kneading dough. So I'm going to go through and do that now. Just a quick note, just sort of this idea of going through all the footage and looking for it. Like, there are certain elements that, again, we're trying to see around some of these corners. We're trying to see down the line of a project when we do some of this stuff. And we might end up wanting to put a really quick cold open on this segment to kind of hook the viewer in, and that specific piece of it might not come until, you know, it's somewhere sort of hidden in the footage that we have to uncover right now. So even though we're just looking for her talking about kneading dough and this as a technical part, it's not going to hurt us to kind of find some different elements that we might want to use in the project later. So that's another reason why we might want to just like go through everything at the top, so that we again have a really good understanding of what's there and to start piecing things out and pulling selects. One quick little tidbit I'm realizing as I'm sort of breaking this footage down and finding selects is that I usually watch things down and on 2x speed, and a lot of the times I'll actually pair that with a transcript. One thing that I've done sort of offline when I'm not editing that's actually helped this ability is I listen to a lot of audiobooks and I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I gradually worked my way up from like listening to it at normal speed to listening at 1.25 speed to listening at 1.5 speed to 1.7 to now 2x. So I can pretty much consume audio and listen at 2x speed and actually be understanding, and pairing that with some sort of visual. It can be helpful to create the transcript for yourself in here and basically listen and read at the same time. And this is going to all help sort of expedite this. I wouldn't, if you don't do that normally, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it's definitely something that you can train yourself to do, train yourself to sort of listen and be able to process, what they're talking about faster. It's actually, now it's a little, I will say it kind of ruins normal speed talking. I would say when you're watching these tutorials down, it will not hurt my feelings, or I won't be offended at all if you watch it on 1.2x or 1.5 or even 2x if you're able to process everything, because it really it doubles your ability to do things, and I find it really helpful. So I'm watching this down at 2x speed, and I'm able to still make my selects and capture everything pretty well. And then if I find something that's like, oh, I like this, I'm going back and listening to it at normal speed just to make sure that it sounds good. So, okay, back into it. Okay, so now I have the interview broken down. As you can see here, I've broken down this interview, gone through and pulled my selects. And just a note about the select stage is I'm not deleting anything out of here. I'm keeping everything intact, keeping everything in the flow. No destructive editing is really happening here. I'm just making cuts and jumping up into different tracks to kind of indicate to myself what is good and what I can leave behind. So like, for instance, here she's talking about yeast.
Sourcing is really incredible up here in the Hudson Valley.
This is about
land of cooking for friends.
About sourcing different ingredients. She's talking about a few different things where it's not specific to the brief, like it's not specifically about kneading dough, but I'm like, all right, maybe we can use some of that in our cut. The things that I jumped up, and so I'll just jump those up one track, and all I do is make the cuts, and I hit Option on a Mac and up or down. That jumps these up, one track. For the things that she specifically talks about kneading dough, I jump those up 2 tracks. So again, it just indicates to me this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is sort of the meat and potatoes of the actual edit.
When you knead your dough,
and this is her breaking down the whole process of kneading dough. This, if we look at the duration of this, it's 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Our brief is to make this full length video anywhere between, like 2 to 3 minutes. So we know we're going to have to trim this back quite a bit, and we're obviously going to cover it with some B-roll and stuff down the line. But this just gives you an idea of like, this is what a timeline looks like for me when I'm doing my selects. And then we're going to move this next into the sort of string out stage. But I'm going to keep breaking this footage down. I just wanted to kind of give an idea of what this looks like, and then we'll move it on to the string out stage. Okay, so I've gone through and just broken this footage down, and now I've made my selects on the main select timeline. As you can see, we have our interview footage. We have some things where she's just standing up and talking about stuff. I've jumped these up to different tracks. So again, like visually, just looking at this timeline, I can see the footage that I'm going to use in our cut. There's plenty of other stuff here. I ended up just making the call not to pull every single select for this, but I would say that this is for demonstration purposes. When you're going through a project and this is something that you're going to actually deliver, don't cheat yourself in this process of going through these selects. you want to go through, you want to make sure you've watched down every second of video, again, just so you know what's in there. And that's really going to help you down the line to be able to jump back. It's going to really help during the review process when, you know, the client is asking questions about something. Hey, do we have something from this? Or, hey, you know, oftentimes they were on the shoot and they might say, hey, you know, like, I remember we were talking about this, like, do we have that? Can you find that? And obviously you can go back and find it, but it's really good to have a full sense of like, yeah, I know that exists, and to be able to jump back in and pull it out. And you can just always jump back into these select sequences and find it. Like, I know at what stage she's talking about different things. Like, I know that, you know, every stage of the process now, having watched this down, like what the actual process is. You know, we're going through ingredients, then we're talking about how we're making the dough, then we're talking about how we and part of that is kneading the dough, part of that is adding yeast, part of that is letting it rise, part of that is rolling the dough out and then getting it ready to kind of make it into this bun, you know, formation, using the timer going through and creating the icing, all the way through to like pulling it out of the oven and getting our reveals here. So like, just having that sense of like, okay, I know the whole process now of what was filmed and what was captured. That's really going to be helpful as you continue down the line, especially once you get into the review stage. But for our purposes today and keeping it to the brief, like I went through and I looked and found everything that just incorporated just kneading, and again, jumped that up 2 tracks. So I know that anything that's on these tracks up here is specifically where she's kneading the dough. This is B-roll of it from the second angle. And then everything that's sort of jumped up another track are things that I think that we'll use down the line in the final edit, but are not necessarily specific to kneading dough. So for instance, like, I took some of this stuff where, you know, we have her just sort of the B-roll shot of the finished cinnamon bun, and it's her, you know, cutting into it. Like, you can see it right here. This is her, you know, cutting into the finished bun here. This is like a nice shot, and this is like it plated and everything, and I'm thinking like, oh, this is nice. We might want to have some sort of intro sequence where we see you know, just a little montage of the full process of making the cinnamon bun. And again, it's not specific to kneading the dough. We might not end up using it, but at least we know we have it, and we can move it into sort of the string out phase where we're just collecting now the selects for what we're making, and you know, we'll move into that stage next.
2-string out. We use string outs to organize our selects. So for consolidation, and then we're going to separate these into separate sequences and label them as like themed sequences. A string out sequence could be something you send out for client review as well, whether it's, you know, for feedback on what parts of an interview to use, or for talent approvals, sending to a motion designer to start putting things together for style frames, etc. Now let's do this in the project.
All right, now that we got our selects made, we are going to move this into a string out. So we're going to duplicate this here, and we're going to move it down into a string out. We're going to rename this to be the stage, which is now number 2, string out stage, and version 1. Now we'll open up the sequence. We'll make it the only sequence in town. Now in this string out sequence, this is the first time we're going to rename the sequence again, just to give it a little bit more shape. It's gonna help us identify sort of like what is what. And really, I use string outs as essentially like a bucket, a way to bucket content. And it's basically a sequence that just gathers all of the footage that we might end up using in the final cut into one sequence, so that you know, we can basically just work with a limited range now, a narrowed down range of the footage that we're going to use for the final edit. So we are going to change the name of this sequence now to you know, our standard sequence name, and then we're going to do, so cinnamon buns dash, we're going to call this kneading dough 2.1. And we're also just going to label it as the aspect ratio, which is 16:9, because eventually, as a part of the brief, we're going to reformat this as 9:16. So now we have this sequence, and we know that it's in the string out stage, and it's the first version of this. Okay, so the first thing we'll do with a string out is we're going to take it and we're going to just do exactly what I said, which is we're just going to use the footage in the sequence that we'll end up using within this particular theme. What we're going to do is we're just going to grab the selects. We're just going to grab the selects that we want out of here, and I'll show you a quick way to do it. Basically, what I do is delete all the stuff in between the selects that we want, and then we're going to do another ripple delete. Maybe there's better ways to do this, but this is how I do it. Don't need any of this. And again, you can be confident in your ability to get rid of stuff and sort of whittle stuff down in here because you've done such a good job of like going through and pulling these selects in the first place. So knowing all that. So now we have this sort of like spread out sequence with things. So we're going to ripple delete this down. We're going to go find our adjustment layer. And you know, this is just like, this is a nice little trick. Just jump those through, punch holes in them. And we are going to select everything and ripple delete. Cool. So now we have our string out here, and you know, we know that we have sort of this all of these segments here, the stuff that's specific to kneading dough that we are going to use basically are these little things that are jumped up onto these tracks. So this string out is also going to be a good chance to bucket those together. So we're going to take the primary interview footage and we are going to take it and take it and group it together. And then we're going to take this other kind of ancillary stuff and we're going to group that together. This is not 100%, you know, necessary, but it's really helpful. Just it gives you a really good sense of like visually what you have to work with, and you know, it's a way to sort of organize your timeline, right? So I'll give you another. For instance, we could also make a string out. So we could duplicate this. We could make a string out just, you know, she actually goes through the process of using yeast as a baking ingredient. So we could also make just a yeast sequence, right? And you know, we could do this for lots of different things. We could make just a just a B-roll sequence, right? 16 by 9-2.1. We could make a, I don't know. We could make just a pure interview sequence, right? And all this is doing, so like for the interview, right? We know that this is her sit down interview. Let's just say we wanted a sequence where it's just that. Now we have this, and we just call it a string out. String out, you know, it's used a few different ways within sort of the editing world, but a string out for our purposes is just a collection of sort of like raw footage that's not really edited into a cohesive piece yet, that is bucketed thematically around that footage. So for instance, again, if we just wanted the interview footage, we'd put it here. B-roll, you know, we know that all this stuff over here is B-roll, and so you know, now we just have a clean, you know, just the B-roll that we're going to use, right? And we can be destructive with this. We can delete stuff out of it because we also know that we can always jump back into our selects and you know, have sort of a clean slate again. So you get the idea. You know, I'm gonna get rid of these sequences. We'll keep just the kneading dough one. We want to first get this right, and to do that, we're going to move to the next stage, which is the assembly stage, or what I call the audio cut stage.
3-assembly. This stage is focused on content and structure, or put another way, it's making sure that the video is coherent and understandable. Ideally, when you're finished with this stage, it should pass the ear test and the timeline should pass the eye test. The ear test, you should be able to close your eyes and listen to the playback, and it should make sense without any visuals. I do this regularly. You know, this is the audio cut version, where the goal is to create a cut that satisfies the primary goals of the brief without worrying about the visuals. Does the dialogue and audio have a coherent structure? As in, does it make sense when you listen to it? Does it deliver on the requested assignment and brief? Is there a key takeaway? Is it dynamic? Is it focused? How's the pacing? Can we tighten anything? If we edited audio, how are the inflections? Is it all kind of smooth, and does it make sense? Are there any, you know, audio pops? Is there a clear focus or theme? This is where we're going to add placeholder graphics, you know, for structure and not for timing necessarily. Does it carry a cohesive narrative or structure we can follow? Is it mostly understandable, entertaining, interesting? These are all things that you want to work out in this stage.
And then does it pass the eye test? This is the base layer, which is gonna, it sets the structure and foundation of the video. And you should actually be able to visually look at the timeline and know how it flows and works together. You can add in sections which you will fill in later, but it should look like a connected sequence. I usually use, adjustment layers just to break things up. This is where you're gonna get a really good sense of the content that's gonna be in each video. This is also where you're gonna separate videos into their specific video name. This is when you're going to distinguish between what we're talking about. What's the theme? What's the headline for the video? For our purposes here, we're gonna make a short form instructional video, but this translates to anything. This same process can be done when you're making a feature-length documentary for, or a 20-minute YouTube video or a 15-second, TikTok. The best way to think about it is in a modular fashion. And each segment of the larger piece, otherwise known as scenes, create a larger structure of the full-length documentary, let's say. And each of those scenes or segments will need to have its own complete structure and flow and be transitioned into and transitioned out of. But in the end, we are moving forward in the timeline regardless of how many stops we have along the way. Okay, let's just jump into the project and see this in action. All right, so now we have our string out. We're going to duplicate this and we're going to bring it into the assembly stage. The assembly stage is also known as the audio cut phase, and the reason for this is what we're really looking to do with this assembly stage is to get it to a place where structurally the format of the piece is there. So we have all the sort of content that's going to be within it, plus structurally we know how it's going to work. So what do I mean by structurally? Each different piece of content that we'll create, each video, it's going to have sort of different components that make it up. And we think of that in the form of like a format, right? How is it formatted? And what does that look like as a structure for the piece? We're going to want some sort of flow to the piece, right? We're going to want to know, oh, maybe there's a little intro section. Maybe we have a little cold open, a little hook that's going to bring the viewer into this. Maybe we're going to have a little intro sequence that starts the piece off. Maybe there's multiple components of kneading dough, like a step-by-step process. Again, something that's procedural. Maybe we have step 1, step 2, step 3. And all that means is we're going to basically use this to structure the piece so that we know, okay, we're going to start with this little intro sequence, then we're going to go into step 1, then we're going to have maybe just a little cutaway to B-roll, use that as almost like a transition or interstitial, and then we're going to have the second section, and again I say section, but it can be 10 seconds. It doesn't need to be long. It can be just like a little section and something that we know, okay, this is how we structure the piece, and then keep it going, right, until the end stage, and then maybe there's like a little outro, right? So now we have a format and a structure for this, and I'll actually go through and do it, but just to give you a sense of how we use this sequence is you should be able to visually look at an assembly cut and know on the timeline visually how it's going to flow. And then we're going to use the next stage to really dial those things in, get our timing right, get our pacing right, get everything sort of much more sort of refined. But this is a place to kind of stick things so that we know, okay, this is what it looks like. So a quick way to do this, we just use adjustment layers. We drop an adjustment layer in. This adjustment layer, we want it to be, let's say, call it a 5-second block. Actually, no, let's do 10 seconds. Okay, so that's 10-second block. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to be very rough with it. We're going to drop this in. Let's just say there's a short little hook. Then we're going to call it like a block where she introduces the idea of kneading dough, and then we're going to do just steps, right? We're going to do step 1. Step 2, step 3, step 4. This is not at all, you would actually go through and, be cutting to showcase this, but I just want to do this for demonstration purposes only to give you a sense of like how we're structuring this out. This is what it would look like. I mean, this is the very most basic format of this, and we're going to dial this in a little bit more, but what we want to make sure that we have in this assembly cut is a structure so that we know what something is going to look like, how it's going to, like, what are the different beats that we're going to try to fill out. And then we're also going to make sure that everything that we need from a content perspective is in here. And by content, I don't mean, I mean, what are they saying? what's actually being said. What's the messaging that's going to go on in the piece? What is the core idea of it? We want to make sure that that is captured in this stage. And the reason I call it the audio cut is because, and I will do this on almost every single video that I edit, is in this stage, I will just listen to it down. I won't even watch it. By the end of this, you should be able to listen to it down and it should make sense. And so, that should mean, again, we talk about from a content perspective, but like what's actually being said, you should be able to listen to it. It should make sense. It should have everything that's needed so that the audience or whoever's watching it is going to get something from it, going to understand it. Hopefully it's interesting. Hopefully, it's compelling. But the next stage, don't worry so much about how dynamic it feels in here. This stage is really just to get it to a place where it's like, okay, everything that we need being said is said in here, and now we can sort of dial it in and make it a more compelling piece. The next stage is really where you're going to start adding more visuals in. It's where you're really going to start honing the edit and refining it to make sure that it's presentable for first delivery, first review when you send it out to a client or whatever stakeholders need to watch it. This is really just to make sure that you have everything you need. And it's a helpful way to think about the edit before you jump into, actually honing it. And really the reason you do this is because you can always find ways to trim stuff back. You can find ways to sort of make things more dynamic. But what's harder to do is if the content isn't there, like for instance, if there's a vital component missing from this tutorial or this interview, you might need to go and find it somewhere else, or you might need to restructure the piece so that you avoid that section, right? If you know that she gathers her towels, right, and puts them to the right-hand side of where she's going to start kneading dough before this, right? And that wasn't included in this, or that's from another part of the edit that you don't have yet, and you want to include that. This is the time when you're going to find that out, and you're going to be able to add things in. Plus, it just helps you to think sort of at a base level, really just like structurally what the piece is going to look like. People do this a lot of different ways. Some people like to really edit to music. Some people like to start with something, get a really compelling intro sequence first, and that is going to help spark the rest of how the edit comes together. I will say I've done that in the past. I used to do that. That's actually not helpful at this stage, and it can hurt you down the line if that's how you're editing. Again, I don't want this is not sort of no creative judgment being passed here, and this is not a tutorial on how to creatively edit, but this at a base level is going to help you think through, and it will change as you move through the edit, but this is at a base level going to help you think through like what the structure of this piece can and will look like. And then you can go in and fill all those things out. Like you can always you can always use one of these sort of sections as, a montage, right? But you don't need to put the montage in here yet. You just need to know, okay, this is eventually going to become a montage. Maybe you want to have a montage in the middle of the piece or the second piece, right? And you're going to use it to transition into the next step of kneading dough, right? Maybe you want to do some sort of interesting, transition or interstitial that's going to move you in between these things. But you don't need to add that here. You just need to know and be able to think through holistically how this piece is going to be structured. Okay, let's go through and actually do this. I just, this was just for demonstration purposes. I just wanted to kind of lay that out so that you get an idea. But now I'm actually going to go through and we're going to get this to a place where the audio is right. And, right now we have, almost 4 minutes. We need to get this down to probably around like a minute and a half. That means that's going to mean trimming it. And the reason I say a minute and a half is because we're going to add some things in there. Like I mentioned, maybe we'll add an intro, an outro, some interstitials in here. So we're gonna do our best to kind of condense this, cut out any areas that any flubs, anything that is not pertinent to what the actual brief is in this one, where we're talking specifically about the technique of kneading dough. So I'm going to go through and get this into a place where I think we're ready to work off of. So this is feeling good now. I am going to duplicate this sequence, make another version of it, because now we can just start eliminating some stuff. Like we got some scraps here that aren't going to make it into this, and it's okay to start deleting now because we also have these in the previous version in case we need to jump back into it. Just looking at some of this stuff, this we will need. I don't think we're going to need, I initially thought we would need some of this stuff. I don't know that we will, but maybe we'll just keep like a little segment of it to use it as some B-roll. Actually, maybe I'll just pull that right now. All right, so now we have everything set in our sequence, and I did layer in a little bit of B-roll here just as a helpful way to know sort of like what's going to get covered over here. But actually, for the first review cut, that's when we're actually going to add in sort of B-roll and layer it on. Really, all we want to make sure of is that we can play this down now and listen to it in full. And it's running at right at 2 minutes 33 seconds. We kind of have these sections. Initially, I thought that we were going to use almost all interview footage, but now I'm realizing that jumping between the interview footage and sort of the sections where she was talking while she was actually doing the activity are going to be really helpful. Like she was actually kneading the dough and she was talking through what she was doing. And I think from a tutorial or a technique standpoint, it's really helpful to see her doing it while she's talking about it. And so what you can see just visually here, right? Something I'll do is I'll just throw these adjustment layers over these sections just to, again, like call out and highlight areas that are sort of different, like when we're kind of changing the look or changing the scene of something. I'll just throw these out here, and so at a glance, we can look at what are the different sort of beats that we have, and again, you'll eventually just delete these adjustment layers, but it is helpful just to see. And you can see like we're going from interview footage to her sort of like doing technique, back to interview, back to interview footage, back to technique, back to interview footage coverage with some B-roll. So that's where we're at. And now I also added in this little cold open where she talks about just like how meditative it is.
It's almost really meditative.
And then we know that after that, maybe we're going to throw in just like a little B-roll sequence of some of this like creamy stuff to showcase that we're talking about Cinnabons, right? Or cinnamon buns, and then we're going to go into the actual tutorial itself. So that's as far as I want to get with this actual assembly cut. I feel good about the format. I think we can listen to it down and it'll play. We can just do that.
It's almost really meditative to knead dough. It just feels really good.
This would be an intro sequence.
When you knead your dough, you turn it out onto, I like to have a floured surface, so gently just shake some flour across your board and then dump your dough out onto the board. It's good to use the heel of your hands and just to continue to pull it back and then push forward with the heel of your hand. And I'm just continuing to roll it. And a good tip actually is underneath your cutting board is to put a wet rag, because if you are working on a cutting board, it holds your cutting board in place. You really want to be able to put the weight of your body behind it. A lot of it is in the heel of your hand, but it's also your biceps. I mean, my whole body's pushing forward, but it's really my arms. I mean, that's where I feel the strength is coming from. You'll feel the change in the dough. So when you first turn it out, it's going to be very soft. And if you were to pull the pieces apart, you wouldn't see much of a stretch at all. And then as you start to knead it, you're developing the gluten, right? So the gluten strands are getting longer. I'm pushing it down until I feel that I've kind of stretched out the entire piece of dough, 1, 2, almost 3, and then I fold it back over on itself. And you're kind of turning it as I'm pushing down. But I can pull it up and show, like it is. See how it's like so much stretchier now? right? And before it would have just snapped. You're gonna feel it getting smoother. And that's what you want, is like a nice smooth dough with a little bit of elastic, feel to it. Smooth is really important. You don't want any lumps in it. And then once you feel that, some people say it feels like, if you put your finger on it, it feels like a baby's belly. Then you leave your dough in a bowl with a cloth over it, put it in somewhere warm. After about an hour, when you feel like you've seen it almost double in size, when you go to touch it, unlike when you did it the first time, when it felt like, your baby's belly and it kind of sprung back, this time the indent's gonna stay. So when the indent stays, then you know that then you're ready to go on. You can punch down the dough and then start forming it into what shape you want.
Okay, this is great. I mean, essentially, the goal here is not to make this it's to condense it as tight as possible. But what we want is sort of the most value out of every second of video that we're showing versus just how tight we can get it. Because just listening to this down, this could become a 30-second piece. This could become a 10-second piece. And it could be just a really quick, short clip of her kneading dough. But that's not the goal of this. The goal is to really give some useful tips, useful technique stuff, and to see it repeated. And obviously, we're going to cover this more and make it more dynamic. But the whole point here is that we could condense it, but this feels good to me. It doesn't feel like there's anything in here left over or sort of redundant that we really need to cut out. It feels pretty tight right now, and we cut out a lot of extra stuff already. So yeah, now we can move it to the first review stage, which is really getting it ready and in a place where it's not really a rough cut, but it could be a final version of it, and it's polished enough and tight enough and has all the elements of the final video. It's where we're going to layer in B-roll. It's where we're going to do slight audio adjustments, probably add some music in, and potentially even add some graphics in for the first pass. So we're going to do that in the next video.
Some people call this the rough cut, but I prefer to call it the first review cut because really it shouldn't be that rough. It should be passable as a finished product, even if it could still be greatly improved. I think a lot of people get this wrong actually. They lean into the idea of a rough cut and believe it should be like really rough or lacking any quality. But in reality, this is the first time your work will get in front of other people, and the real goal isn't to get them to approve it right there on the spot, though that does happen and it is nice, but it's to give them enough that they can react to. It's hard to react to something which doesn't have much shape, especially if you're not like super experienced in it. It's hard to express what I think should change or how I'd like something to be different if I can't tell you what it is. It'd be like a chef asking you how your food is if they dropped a bag of groceries on the table. Cook it a little and we'll tell you. Step 1, rename the sequence with the updated stage and version. Step 2, layer in visuals. This is also where you can add in montages or any visual creative segments within the sequence. This is the place to, kind of start getting creative with your edit. Step 3, add music. This is the stage where you have license to pace the edit, and music can be really helpful for that. If you're just adding a temporary music bed, you can add that here too. Step 4, add temporary graphics. This will help to fully understand the video. These can also help fill in any content gaps that still exist. So like, for instance, if you're missing some vital piece of context that you couldn't find in your footage, you couldn't find in the interview, maybe that would be a really helpful place to put a text overlay to add additional context to make this all make sense, right? Step 5, QC and export. Let's note, we still won't add captions here, but this cut also has the goal of including as many elements as we can, which we believe will also be included in the final video, even if it's just placeholders. We really want to get a sense based on this stage of what the final product will look like. My only other note here is, generally speaking, I like to leave the first review cut a little bit fat, that we can, so that we can trim it. This again offers, options for people to react to. It's a lot easier to say, I really love this section, but this part is just kind of redundant. We can cut that, but it's okay to leave it because sometimes the additional context is helpful. Like in this scenario, where we're trying to,
learn something, it might be helpful to have additional context there, right? And I don't know that I'm the best person to make that final decision, so we can leave that to the client. So in this cut, if the goal is to make a 2 to 3 minute long video, maybe we'll leave this cut at like 4 minutes. You can always reduce something. You really can. You really can always cut stuff out, but it can be hard, later in the process to strategically add things in. So sometimes it's good to also put it in there so that the client has a really good idea of like what is actually in there. Because again, they're not necessarily fully reviewing all this footage beforehand or giving you really specific notes before you jump into the edit. So it can be helpful to leave this particular version, again, like a little bit more meat. Okay, so now let's jump into the project and see this all in action. All right, so we are about to move into the first review, and just quick reminder that the assembly cut is really not meant to be perfect. It's really just meant to get your structure, get all the content you're going to need in there, and to make sure that it makes sense and it flows a little bit. And again, to give you an idea of if there's anything missing from it that you're going to need to add at some point. But really what we're trying to do now is fine tune this. So right now, this is running at 2 minutes and 33 seconds. In the first review cut, we can cut that down. We can really trim it out. So you don't need to get sort of fine-tuned in the assembly cut. That's what the first review cut is for. So we're going to do that. We're going to duplicate the sequence. We're going to drop it in here. We're going to rename it as 4.1. Another thing to note with stringouts can be, you can make them sort of just grouped thematic. But you can, once you go into the assembly and first review cut, really just the assembly cut, you can change that name again. So let's just say it was the topic, we made this sequence about kneading dough, right? Or we made this sequence about just the interview. Like almost obviously, like if we were just cutting the interview, let's just say the interview was getting turned into a podcast or something, right? We could duplicate this sequence. We could bring it into the assembly cut. And now we have it here. We could change the name from like interview to like interview dash, podcast, or we can call this like just, podcast about baking, episode 1, right? So you can make it like fairly specific, and then we would do 16:9 and then dash 3.1, right? So that's just this, and now we just have a sequence which is just the interview. I'm going to delete this, but the string outs are really just there to help you organize all of your footage into sequences, and pulling from different places. So this is everything that we're going to need for kneading dough. But again, you could make a bunch of different string outs that just are thematic, and then once you bring them into the assembly, that's when we can rename them. So we kept it as kneading dough, but it's we could have changed it to kneading dough. You can use spaces in there. Kneading dough tutorial, right? And now we have this sort of sequence that's ready to go. This is our first review cut. So you can do that. It made sense to kind of keep it as just kneading dough, but I just wanted to clarify the difference between like the name and the string out is really just to help you group footage together. And then once you go into assembly and first review, that's really when you're starting to make actual edits that are going to become unique deliverables, right? So string outs can really just, you can pull from and resort back to. I like to make string outs. Anytime especially if it's unscripted, I love to use string outs to like for pattern recognition. Like I love going through a bunch of different footage and finding patterns within them, so things that just reoccur all the time. So this could be something visual, like for instance, if you're filming B-roll, you're filming, let's just say, a documentary around New York City, right? And you just happen to have footage of a bunch of different taxi cabs, right, in different locations. So you might just make a taxi cab string out, right? All of the different taxi cabs you see. Maybe you can do something with it. Maybe it's something from dialogue, right? You've seen supercuts where people are just saying the same word across different things. That's a great place for a string out. So maybe it's just people saying the word cool, and it's like 20 different interviews and they're all saying cool, and so you have cool, 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 right, in one string out. It's really helpful to do that. I love doing that, but that's where I'm using string outs as a way to kind of bucket different footage. Okay, back to the first review cut. Here we are in the first review cut. We have we have this kind of clean sequence. This is going to be pretty quick, honestly. This is feeling pretty good. I'm actually going to get rid of these for right now because we don't need them and start actually layering things in. And the first review cut is really going to become the first thing that we're going to send over. So now it's just a matter of just like tightening, tuning, and making sure it's feeling good. So I actually want to add some music here. So I did go through and I pulled some music for this. So, I'm not going to go into again, this is not about creative editing. I'm not going to go into how to source music, what music is right for what pieces, or really all that much about, music editing in general. But just know you can, there's lots of ways to source music. So let's just listen to it really quick. I like this. Okay, this one's good. I'll also do this, right? This is like where the beat drops. We'll find it. So you have your preamble here. Maybe we find just where this beat drops, right at the top. And what I'll do is I'll line that up to where we want the sort of, let's just say, an intro sequence, an intro montage to come in. And we'll just back it up from there.
It's almost really meditative to knead dough. It just feels really good. Just feels really good.
It's a little bit abrupt, so what I'm going to do is just soften it a little bit.
To knead dough, it just feels really good.
Like she goes into saying something else. She says "and" really quickly.
Really good. When you knead your dough, you turn it out onto, I like to have a floured surface, so gently just shake some flour across your board and then dump your dough out onto the board. It's good to use the heel of your hands.
So right off the bat, I can tell that there's a little bit of, this audio needs a little bit of boost. And I'm just using the overall gain function there.
It's almost really meditative to knead dough. It just feels really good. It's almost really meditative to knead dough. It just feels really good. When you knead your dough, you turn it out on.
So let's just add something really quick here. Just add like a little sequence at the top that just lets us know that we're making cinnamon buns here. Another just little note here is I like to, always, you never want to really do too many hard cuts where basically the edge of the previous clip bumps right up against the next clip. That happens all the time, but it softens it a little bit and it makes it a little bit nicer if you can kind of extend that B-roll and just bring the audio just a little bit underneath. That's called, oh God, a J cut. I don't know. I didn't go to school for this. I have no idea, but I think it's called a J cut, where you're basically just extending out over and it softens it a little bit, and it's really helpful when you're doing stuff like this. Just to kind of, it's a nice way to sort of introduce. It's very subtle, but it introduces the audio coming in and it makes it a little bit softer for the viewer as opposed to like a real abrupt. You can see it. Let's watch the difference here.
Right? And before it would have just snapped. You're going to feel it getting smooth.
That doesn't feel too bad, but now we can go like this.
Before it would have just snapped. You're going to feel it getting smoother. And that's...
I like that better. We can just bring it out a couple frames.
Right? And before it would have just snapped. You're going to feel...
And all I'm doing there, by the way, is I'm just highlighting this and I'm hitting, I made a keyboard shortcut for this, but I'm just hitting the bracket, the right bracket, which nudges everything over one frame. So I can nudge it to the right one frame or back. And that just helps me kind of like, frame it out a little bit.
Right? And before it would have just snapped. You're gonna feel it getting smoother.
All right, that feels great. And now, you know, we shaved about 13 seconds off that. That feels pretty good. Let's just see if we left any B-roll here. That's really going to help us. This will be like a title screen, so maybe we just add a quick little adjustment layer over this to let us know that this is going to be a title screen. Maybe we'll lower, you know, I don't think we're going to lower third her for this, but I wonder if there's any, I don't think we really have to include anything else in this, but I'm going to add a quick graphic to it, but otherwise we just need to reformat this thing and we should be good. Just making another clean timeline, and then I'm actually going to make one more. I'm actually going to change the name of this to the actual video title, which is going to be How to Knead Dough by Hand. Alright, and I'm also just going to create an old folder in here, and we're going to drop the other things in here just to keep it as nice and clean as possible. And the only other thing we're going to do before we reformat it is, let's reformat it first. So what we can do here is we're just going to jump this up. We know the specs are 180. Going to reformat that, and because we have, I hit copy, and let's just make sure that we have everything on the right track here. We're gonna separate these tracks. This is where we can clean some stuff up. We're gonna separate these tracks so that we can just copy and paste attributes on
It's
here.
almost really meditative to.
So we're gonna make sure our interview footage are on these first two tracks, and then we're going to jump these other tracks up, and we're gonna separate B cam from A cam. And we are going to put B cam on this track. Yep, and we're going to put our A cam stuff there. Just one up. What is this? A cam. So we're actually going to drop all this down a little bit. We'll drop this down one so we have clean tracks, and then we're going to put our graphics up here. What footage? This is B cam, so we're going to go up to A cam there. Great. So now what we can do is we can take this and we can copy it, and then we can paste it by hitting Option V, and that'll paste attributes, and we just want to paste the motion, so we're reframed.
It's almost really meditative.
One note here is I don't use auto reframe. I haven't found it to be that great a tool yet, and I like to be able to have full control over things and just copy and paste our attributes versus just dropping on auto reframe. Auto reframe can be good, but I've found that it's not consistent enough to where we use it yet for anything. We're just going to go through this and reframe everything. So that looks good. Everything's reframed. We are going to pull in a title card here. It's going to be in our GFX folder, so we're going to add it to the GFX. Let me actually go back into that. So I went into the GFX folder, hit import. In the exports folder, this came out of After Effects, just a single frame. It's just this How to Knead Dough. And so we put it into same thing 0515-GFX, and we are going to import that into the GFX folder. And again, it's chronological because we might add graphics a few days from now. And so we will bring this in and we will just pop it on there. And there you have it. So that's going to be our title card.
It's almost really meditative to knead dough. It just feels really good.
This all sounds and feels good to me. Now the only thing left to do, we're going to add this adjustment layer. I'm just going to add a quick little LUT over this so that it looks okay for we add some color into it. So we're not going to do a crazy. We're just going to add, interesting. There we go. We're going to add the Alexa default,
It's almost really
Let's just see if there's anything better. I don't know what this was shot on. Honestly, we would almost always find out the codec for this. Or not the codec, but what it was shot on. And we could dial in a LUT. But we're just going to use the Alexa, and then we're going to drop some of the highlights down. just to give us this look. We're going to add some contrast, 50, and we are going to up the vibrance a little bit. Go to creative. We're just going to add 15 to the vibrance, and maybe we even drop, you know, maybe we warm this up ever so slightly. It's warm, you know, it's a baking video. Maybe that was too much. No, it's okay. And we'll drop the midtones down a little bit, drop the highlights down, drop the shadows down, just add that contrast. It's looking good there. You know, just a before and after, you can see what a stark difference that is. All this stuff looks pretty good. Definitely looks a little bit warm, but the interview looks a little cool, and the dough making looks a little bit warm. All right, you know what? We're going to add just a little bit of warmth to the interview itself, just because, you know, and we can always go back in and adjust this later. This is, again, just for a first review. We're going to drop the highlights down. Whoa, maybe not that much. That looks okay. And then we're just going to make it a little bit warmer, just so we kind of match the vibe here, and we can actually drop the warmth just a little bit on this so that they match. We're not doing, you know, we're not doing like a full scene to scene here.
It's almost real.
But that looks pretty good, and we're just going to cut these together, and we're just going to do the lumetri. And so there you have it. This is, you know, it's a little bit warmer, feels a little bit more bakery. Now everything kind of feels good, feels like it's matching. I'm noticing that the dough, this is a little bit too hot, so we're actually going to undo this. I like to just get one clip right and then paste it to the rest. So we're going to do this. That is going to match, and we can just do a little toggle between. Looks like this even could use a little bit more. Drop the highlights even more. Let's just say drop them by, we'll add a little bit more contrast there, and we'll darken the shadows just a little bit. That's feeling good. That's feeling like it matches. Okay. And now we can just copy that and paste that again. Great.
Back, and then.
So again, this feels like, you know, you want to get it to a place where, like, I would be okay posting this. You know, this is it's not perfect. There's still some things that we can tweak and go through, but it's basically at a place where it feels good enough. Like, we'll probably want to add some captions to this. We'll probably want to do a little bit of audio tweaking. But overall, it feels, you know, it feels fine. It feels really good. It looks consistent enough. This is like good enough to, you know, this is something that I would feel okay posting, you know, online or on a site. So that's the place you want to get to with your first review cut. It shouldn't feel too rough. It should feel in this place where, you know, you've gone through this process now. You've done, you know, you've gotten to this place where it's basically good enough to post, and there's just a few things that, you know, you could probably dial in, but it's basically ready and at a place where a client could really react to it, could really give actual feedback to it. That's really going to help. Now again, this is kind of dependent on how much information the client has given you up front, and you know, the inputs are also important here. How's the actual content itself? One other pet peeve of mine, if you go to the very end of a sequence and hit out, when you hit out to export something, it goes one frame past your playhead. So actually what you want to do is you want to go to the end of the sequence, hit in one frame, and then hit out to set your out point. That way it never ends on a single frame of black. And we are going to export this by hitting Command M. We're going to set this up to export, and we're going to use an export folder 0515-1. Check our video settings, match the source, and we are going to make this 20 for the target bit rate, make it kind of high, you know, that's a high enough resolution. We're going to export this thing, and that's your first review cut. So So this is something that we would upload and send it to a client, and the client would give us some feedback. And for that, we will go into the next stage, which is the collab cut. Stage 5, this is the collab stage, otherwise known as the review process. This is where we get somebody else other than us to review this for the first time and give us feedback or notes, right? Settle in, get cozy. This is where the majority of our time is spent in this collaboration stage. This is where versions and option tags on names of sequences come into play. This is where we'll want to keep a backlog of sequences we've previously done so that we can access them in case we need to revert back to them. The goal of this stage really is to finalize the edit. This is where all the finalization will come in, including adding final music tracks, graphics, color correction, and final audio mix. A note on this, you can continue to version throughout the collaboration phase. Let's jump into the project and address some of the following notes. All right, so let's assume that we sent off the first review cut over to client, and they came back with some notes, which is very common. You're usually going to go through lots of rounds of review on things as you kind of get them dialed in, but we have the notes here. They're all up on Frame.io. And we're just going to use this as a checklist of things that we're going to go through. And so we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to rename it. Same thing, but we're going to call it 5.1 because we are now in the 5th stage, or really the 6th stage, but labeled number 5, and it's the collaboration stage. So we have our collab stage 5.1, which is the version. So open this up. We're going to clear out our timeline panel, and let's just review the notes here. First and foremost, we have, right at the top of the video, pretty typical, either at the very head or tail of something, you'll get sort of like a global note. So we see add captions formatted for IG Reels. That's actually an important spec, so we're going to need to make sure that the captions are within the safe zone for Instagram Reels. Okay, right here it's saying
This feels really good.
to maybe use little sound effects to transition into this screen so it's not so abrupt. Sounds like there's a little audio pop here. Let's start with B-roll from the other angle. Okay, this is all making sense. We can kind of address these just as we go through. First, we need to add some sound effects here. Let me actually grab some sound effects before we jump into this. Alright, so we got our sound effects here. Let's add them into our audio folder. Again, as you can see, chronological 0515 SFX, standing for sound effects. Again, it's just if we had something in tomorrow, it'd be 0516. So first, let's work this transition here. Okay, that feels good.
To knead dough, it just feels really good.
I like it. I like it. I like it. We are going to check this off. So we'll check it and we'll just hide everything that's done. So now we want to smooth the audio transition. Let's see.
It's good to use the heel of your hands.
So we got at 17. Let's go there.
It's good to use the heel of your hands. And just to
Your dough out onto the board.
it's good to use.
Yeah, I get it. So we can do some smoothing with all these transitions, and I really like to just use crossfades with things. Really, really simple. We're not doing any sort of significant, we're not jumping into the audio mixer. We're certainly not using keyframes on here. We're just using simple constant power cross dissolves, maybe like 6 frames tops. And that we're just going to slide these in between.
Board.
It's good to use
To the board.
So that's a little bit of an abrupt, because we're switching between, the VO here is actually her interview versus, cutting to the segment where she's actually just kneading the dough. So let's just see if we can smooth
Onto
that
the
out.
board.
It's good to use the heel of your hand.
Dump your
Yeah.
dough out onto the board.
It's good to use the heel.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, that's definitely smoother. It's not nearly as abrupt. Let's see how far we
Onto
can
the
push
board.
It's good to use the
it. Oh,
heel.
there you go. That's nice.
Onto the board.
It's good to use the
Okay, feels good there. Next up, let's start B-roll from the other angle at 29 seconds. So we just go in.
and a good tip actually is underneath your cutting board.
Yeah, so I see the note.
And I'm just continuing to roll it. And a good tip actually is underneath your cutting board.
like that's kind of weird. Maybe what we do is we just extend this out a bit and then we extend this back so it's just smooth.
Continuing to roll it. And a good tip actually is underneath your cutting board is to put a wet rag, because if you are working on a cutting board,
Maybe we actually extend that a little bit.
to roll it. And a good tip actually is underneath your cutting board.
We don't want to see too much of her. Just
And a
like,
good tip actually is underneath your cutting board
Yeah.
is to put a wet rag, because if you are working on a cutting board, it continuing
good.
to roll it. And a good tip actually is under
Cool. That feels good. Next up, is there an establishing shot we can use to showcase that she is talking while doing this work? Doing the work. Maybe we even show this in the cold open at the top of the video. I see. Well, we do kind of establish it up here, but let's just see if there's anything else in the selects that we might be able to use. I like it.
Dough. It just feels really good. When you knead your dough, you turn it out on.
Okay, check music levels. It's fighting with her a bit at 1 minute. Let's see.
When you
a lot of it is in the heel of your hand, but it's also your bicep.
We can just drop the music down overall, maybe like 2. Let's just see. Yeah, it's bouncing around minus 24 to minus 18. That's pretty good, and it's a really gentle track. It's not really disturbing anything, but we can maybe drop it down even 2 more. Okay.
Oh, so when you first
Cool. That's good. Cut the here at 141.
smooth is really important. A bit of elastic feel to it.
There's the
Smooth. It,
and I'm not going to ripple delete it yet because we actually have one more edit, and because it's time stamped, I don't want to change the timing in it yet, so we'll go back and we'll ripple delete that in a second. But let's just see what we got here. What's the last one?
and punch down the dough and then start forming it in.
Oh yeah, so we don't actually know what a punch down is, so she talks about that in a different part of the interview, so we can just delete that from
This
here.
time the indent's going to stay. The indent's going to stay. Then you're ready to go on. You can start forming it into what shape you want.
Nice, that sounds
So when the
smooth.
indent stays, then you know that then you're ready to go on. You can start forming it into what shape. This time the indent's going to stay. So when the indent
And let's jump this down now because we can. Can't ripple delete that because we got some cuts, but that's okay.
with a little bit of elastic feel to it. Smooth is really important. You don't want any elastic feel to it. Smooth is really important. You don't want any lumps in
Okay, I
it.
think we're good.
And then
So that is done. That is done. Now, adding captions. Okay, so we made our edits. We're going to do another version here, and we are going to label it 5.2. Let's close this sucker down and let's do some captions. So we are going to just create them in here. We're going to go to text. We are going to go to captions. All right. So now what we want to do just before we add captions, we want to make sure that we're bringing this in and it's in Instagram Reels Save. Also, the adjustment layer should actually go in the titles, but we're going to bring this in. This is just a safe margin for where we can put captions, and as you'll see, there's a blue box that is going to be the safe zone for IG Reels actually. So we're going to highlight these, and we are going to change their format up a little bit. Let's see if we highlight them. So we're going to change this. Let's use classic old Helvetica regular. We're going to change it to 55, make them like slightly bigger, and we are going to move them up so that they are above that blue line. I actually happen to know that if you put them at minus 400, they will be good there. Let's also make it, let's see. Yeah, Helvetica bold. That feels good. Okay, now we can go in. We don't have to worry about this IG Reels Safe anymore. We're going to definitely have to format these. As you can see, there's like some that have 4 lines. We only want them as 2 liners. And so what we're going to do is we're going to delete that. And we are going to go in and let's format these bad boys and do some copy editing while we're at it. You know, I should note that normally we do use a copy editor, somebody who can go in and actually proofread all of these and make sure that spelling is correct, grammar is correct. If there's names are spelled correctly, it's actually a really it's a little bit time intensive, but it's definitely good. When you're doing sort of brand or client work, you don't want to mess something like that up. You really want to make sure that everything is spelled correctly and you're not messing things up and it's all formatted correctly. So we do spend a decent amount of time making sure captions are good, because we want to avoid any of those sort of editorial mistakes. But I'm going to go through right now and just make sure this is formatted correctly. Couple pet peeves: only keep 2 lines and never have just one word on its own line for captions. We're good there. So now time to export, and we just want to make sure that we are going to export with the captions burned in, which clearly we're not. So we need to go down, turn the captions on, boom, now they show up, and we are going to export that, and we will put it into the same folder with the same name and export it. And that's your collaboration, and you would send that back to the client. You might get more feedback, and you just do that on repeat until it is approved.
6-delivery. Stage 6 is the delivery stage and has 3 main components: reformatting the content for multiple deliverables if requested, quality checking in the edit and upon export, and then cleaning up the project for project collect and pass off.
All right, great news. We got approved. We got the video approved, and now it is time to deliver. We are going to move this edit into the final stage, which is the delivery stage. Now, the collab cut, wherever you leave it, the last one that got approved, that's an approved cut. That's an approved version. The only thing that we're going to do in this sort of delivery stage, this delivery folder, is that one, it's going to signify that we're going to do quality checking, quality control. So we're going to watch it down in the edit. There's a couple of things. I'm not going to go over all of them in this video. Actually, that will be a whole separate discussion of just how we quality check. But in this delivery folder, it's a good signifier to signal to yourself that this is time to quality check this stuff. This is time to make sure that everything is sort of finalized and we got it to a place where it's ready to deliver. But within the actual stage itself, what we're going to do, we're going to use this folder for whatever the batch of deliverables is. So something common that happens is we will get we'll do an edit, we will deliver it, we will export a final version of it, and then a week later we'll get a request for something different. So maybe we reformatted it for 9:16 originally, and now the client comes back and they want it as a 16:9 without captions, or they want some sort of subtle tweak. They want to add an end card to it, or they want to add a logo watermark bug to it, or they want to reformat it as a 4:5, right? They want different specs. That is all going to be generated from the same sort of final version. So whatever the final collab version is, that is the approved version. And what we do is we're just going to duplicate, and we're just going to use this folder as today's or whatever the day you're delivering on, that day's chronological delivery. So we're going to label it 0515, and we're also going to version this out. Even though it's a it's going to be a delivery cut, we're going to send this for sort of delivery. Doesn't mean that it's actually the final version. There's always those memes that are like final. We're just going to use a simple versioning technique there. So if there does come a change with whatever we do deliver, we can just version it again, make that change, and deliver that out. So this is going to be 6.1. So we have a nice 9:16 with captions, right? So we're going to name this. We're going to name it as if it's deliverable, and this is what this is for. This is to kind of break down what all the different types of deliverables are, and we can just keep you can change the specs on them, you can do whatever, but again, this is really the final version that got approved, and now we're just moving into the delivery stage. So it's going to be month, day, client, project title, video name, the specs, and then we're going to add the codec. So we're going to make this an MP4, and we are going to give the audio channels, there's just going to be 2 channels, so it's 2 chan, and then we are going to say texted, and then we are going to say subs, and I tag on the end the stage and the version. So this is the, stage 6, which is delivery, and then the version, which is 1. So obviously that is a long video title, video name, but it is going to be helpful because now what we want to do, let's just say we want to change the codec that we're going to deliver. We're also going to deliver a ProRes version of this. So let's do ProRes 422, right? Also, whether or not it's capitalized or not doesn't need to be. Whoops. Let's also make sure it's spelled correctly. And let's also say that we're going to do one, if there is no bug, you don't need to add no bug, but I do it sometimes. We're just going to delete it because it's not necessary for this. There isn't going to be one with a bug, so it's kind of pointless to add that there's no bug in it. If there were some that had bugs and some that didn't, or some that had watermarks and some that didn't, then we could include it, but we don't need to include it for that reason here. And then we're going to do this, which is we'll do a text list version, which is ProRes, and let's see, anything else that we need. Text list, and we'll say no. If it's text list, you don't need to include the word subs or no subs because it's text list, so it's not going to have any anything on it. So now, or any overlays on it at all, no graphics. So now we just want to make sure that we have all this correct. So we have an MP4 that's getting delivered, we have a ProRes 422 that's getting delivered, and we have a ProRes 422 that's going to get delivered, but it's going to be textless. So what we want to do is we want to go in and we want to remove all the text, and we want to disable the captions here and make sure it's nice and clean. This actually shouldn't be named MP4. We're actually going to change it to H264. That is the correct naming of it, and we are going to send these to Media Encoder. Now we find them in our Media Encoder, and we have we name them. They're all sort of give us the indication of what these need to be. So this is the H264 one. We're going to match the source. We're going to go down. We're actually going to make this 30 bit rate. Want to make sure that our captions are burned into it. Make sure, just scrub through. Looks good. We're going to say OK, and then we're going to change these. These need to be ProRes 422, right? So we're actually going to go down. We're going to change it to QuickTime, and then we are going to do ProRes 422. And one has subs and one is text list. So this one we don't need to worry about, but this one we need to make sure that the subs are going to show up on there. And it looks like they are not. So we need to make sure that we have captions selected and burn captions into video. So there they are. And we are good to go there. And all right, now we just need to pick our export folder. We're going to go into the main project folder. We are going to call this 0515-2 because we had some earlier ones. This is our delivery folder, and again, you don't need to label it as delivery. You don't need to say, oh, this is an actual delivery folder, because we have other mechanisms that we use to deliver things, where they end up living. If we deliver them on some sort of FTP or and any sort of asset management system, we will know that it gets delivered to the client. So a lot of the times we're using some external asset management system on behalf of a client to deliver to, and so once it's in there, then we know it's approved. We also have other things like Asana, which we use for project management, and that is basically a ledger which we can use to know what the final version is and jump into a project that's been completed on there. But again, the reason we're not labeling it as delivery, the reason we're not labeling it specifically in the export folder as final, is because it might not be final. There might be other things that come. So there might be other requests that come down the line for the same video. So we're just going to keep it chronological, and we're going to keep it moving. So we're going to let this export, but those are all the stages of a sequence. Those are all the stages of a project, and yeah, there's lots more. This kind of glossed over a lot of stuff, but by and large,
that's it. And if you follow that process, if you kind of work from your sync stage down to your delivery and you follow that sort of procedure, you're going to be in a really good place, and more than anything, you're going to help yourself down the line save time when things come back and you need to jump back into a project and, you know, work through it, find new things, add things to update it, you know, all those things. Also, it's almost 11 p.m. now. We started this bright and early in the morning, and so we're at the end of the day. Work still got done today somehow while we were making this. So glad you stuck with me through this, and we're off and delivered. Great job.
If you stick to these stages, they're fairly broad and simple, but going in this order and keeping these stages, I think is really helpful. It has helped me tremendously to do this. You know, if I stick in this flow and this process, it just works. You will be shocked if you haven't done it in any sort of structured format. Doing it this way is really going to help you down the line. It's going to help you be able to create things a lot faster. It's going to be able to level up your creativity because you're not thinking, you know, you have a really dialed in process for this. So I just think as an editor myself, it's really helpful to think this way.